So as you all are signing in and getting settled for today's webinar with Dr. Basu, we'd like to welcome you all to this New Perspectives Integral Yoga platform, which is sponsored, as you probably know, by Aarau University in Surat, India, as well as Sri Aurobindo Integral Life Center that's in Surat, as well as here in Fountain Inn, South Carolina. And all three organizations are founded and envisioned by H.P. Rama. I'm Rade. I'm the executive director of the center in Fountain Inn, and I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Vladimir Yatsenko. And we'd like to just observe a few moments of silence before proceeding with the webinar, please. So again, welcome as folks continue to sign in. We are very honored today to have with us once again Dr. Sumitra Basu, who will be addressing the intriguing and also very critical topic of power, money, and sex. And Sri Aurobindo identifies power, money, and sex as the three forces that have the strongest attraction for the human ego. And the mother later commented on this, saying, I believe the three are independent and that all three have to be conquered to be sure of having any one. When you want to conquer one, you must have the other two. Unless one has mastered these three, desire for power, desire for money, and desire for sex, one cannot truly possess any of them firmly and surely. Each of these three things not only has its own value in the world of desires, but leans upon the other two. So today I'll be handing it over to Vladimir, our moderator, who will do a more formal introduction of Dr. Basu, but I did want to welcome you, Dr. Basu, once again to Perspectives. And as always, there is a Q&A box there at the bottom of your screen. So if you have questions during Dr. Basu's talk, please include or type in the Q&A box. We are going to try to keep to this 1 hour time period, but Dr. Basu will hopefully be able to get to a few of your questions towards the end. With that, Vladimir, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Radha. Yes, we are very happy to have with us today Dr. Sumitra Basu, who is a psychiatrist working with consciousness paradigms. He conducts workshops on personal growth and is the founder editor of Namaha, the Journal of Integral Health. He has authored the book Integral Health and is deeply interested in the interplay of Aurobindonian metaphysics and mental health. He has developed a module of consciousness-based psychology, and along with Michael Majowicz, has authored a book on the consciousness-based psychology, which looks at psychopathology and counseling from an entirely new perspective that arises from the experiential teachings of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother.
And
Yes.
this is a very unique presentation, and I'm honored to be able to speak on this subject. And we should not consider it to be a taboo subject, because we are dealing with spirituality, because it is practical spirituality. Spirituality will survive only if we can address the practical issues of life. So that is very important. And from these practical issues, actually, there is a gateway, there is a path from where you can go to somewhere which is unbelievable, somewhere where actually you know the trajectory from where the transformation will start. So it's very important to know the very basic things of human life. And power, sex, and money have something very basically common to each other, because all of them are related to what Sri Aurobindo called the vital plane of consciousness. There's the plane which is the repertoire of our life energy. There's the plane which holds our emotions, our dynamisms, our passions, our great energies, our great creative, what we call potentialities. You see, if an artist has a great idea that want us to have the vital through which that idea has to be executed in the world. So without the vital, the idea will be a utopian idea. The idea will not be executed. So even if you are a great thinker, you need to have a very fine vital, a strong vital through which the idea has to be executed. So the vital is so important and so difficult to understand. Then Sri Aurobindo uses the word vital as a noun. This is interesting because Sri Aurobindo has given such importance to this zone of consciousness which lies between the physical consciousness and the mental consciousness. And Sri Aurobindo therefore uses it as a noun and shows how important it is. So you see that sometimes when we see that there are very famous people and who are having problems with their very practical issues of life, like sex and power. Or on the other hand, they are very powerful people and they were are very creative people. They are people with great ideas, and we are surprised when we find that they can't handle such practical issues like power, sex, and money. Then we are surprised that how it is that. How do we reconcile this fact that a person with great creative ideas cannot handle these very mundane issues of life? This is because the vital is not understood. Because the person might have great creative ideas, but has been purified or transformed or has been properly geared to. So the vital needs to be addressed in a very proper way. Unless the vital is there in its proper position, then whatever great ideas you might have, you might fall prey to these very mundane things of life, this power, sex, and money. So vital is that important. But then again, when I'm loosely saying that all these things are related to the vital, but in the interplay of power, sex, and money, there are zones of the vital where different things take place which are going to affect this interplay. So this interplay is not equal at every place of the vital. There are differences also in the what you call in the expressions of the vital. So you have to, we'll bear with it. We'll go through PowerPoint presentation, and it is something which might appear a little bit difficult, but then you have to go back and look at the planes and powers of consciousness on which Sri Aurobindo has said many things, has written many things that are in the letters on yoga. There are many references to them. So might be you have to cross-check them to understand certain of the terms that we will be using here today. So we'll just go sharing the screen. So we start with this 1927 quote of Sri Aurobindo, where he says about power, money, and sex, about the interplay, that they have the strongest attraction for the human ego and the asura. You see, there are two things he's saying, that these three things have a strong attraction for the human ego and also for the asura and the asura. He's not equating the ego with the asura, but he's saying that not only for the human ego, it has also an attraction for the asura. Now mind it, because this is important to understand Sri Aurobindo's paradigm of thinking this on power, money, and sex. Then we have to understand that the forces other than human beings also are involved in this interplay, and that's why he is saying ego and the asura, and he's saying that they are most generally missold and misused by those who retain them. And then this is what Radhe referred to, this 1951 statement of the mother, that the mother says that I believe the three are interdependent and all of them have to be conquered. To be sure of having any one of them, to have conquered, if you want to be sure that you have conquered any of one of them, you cannot do it in an isolated way. You have to conquer all the three. Isolated, you will conquer one and not the others. That is not possible. If you have to conquer one, it automatically means that you have to conquer the other two also. So they are the three great obstacles in the terrestrial human life. You see again, in terrestrial human life, not in the life there in the heavens or in the non-evolutionary planes, not there, in the terrestrial human life. And unless they are conquered, humanity cannot change. So with this, we start this very interesting observation of Sri Aurobindo, that these three have an attraction both for the human ego and for the Asura. We have to understand what Sri Aurobindo means by the Asura. And is the Asura different from the human ego? We'll come to that. And I would say that I was very thankful to be able to present this program today, because whenever I find an opportunity, I would like to project this statement of Sri Aurobindo, that a great, what you call, a great harm has been done to the human mind by giving an overemphasis on the suppressed sexual complexes. And Sri Aurobindo says that it is a dangerous falsehood. Of course, they are there, but they have been highly exaggerated. They've been highly exaggerated. Of course, if this exaggeration was there, that is why these neo-Freudians came. They would not have come, because they understood that Freud was overemphasizing certain things, which he would better, if he would have not done that. But then already the damage was done. And Sri Aurobindo says that the mind and vital has been made more or less fundamentally impure than before. And actually this has been done. So we do not know the repercussions of psychoanalysis, what has happened to the psyche of the human race, that certain lowering of the, what you call, the purity has been effectuated by that movement. And you have to remember this. Of course, the backlash is coming. As for example, Michael will always tell you, as last time Michael told you, that how in USA, the Freud has been totally repressed by clinical Buddhism, by mindfulness, meditation, and other things, which are all representing clinical Buddhism in practice. So that would have come, but by the time, a great damage has already been done. And very interesting, we will come to this afterwards, after a few slides, when Maurice Mager had written that he was writing his experience, that he was always seeing people with strong sexual instincts. They were surrounded by multiple vital forces. And Mother said it is right. What he has said is not wrong, it is right. And that people with strong sexual instincts, they're drawing in vital forces from all sides. And these forces are also acting on that person to act out his sexual behavior. So sexual behavior is not only stimulated by something inside. Of course, there is something inside them. As Mother says that it arouses something inside them, the sexual impulse arouses something inside their subject. But also there is something which is being there, which is being attacked or stimulated from outside also. Something is coming from outside also. There's an excitation that comes from outside. And if people who are deeply into sexual malpractices, if they are questioned differently, if they are asked in a different type of setting, then they can confess that there was something also outside that was stimulating us. It's not only that things that were coming from inside. Now, this is very important to understand. You see, this is relating to the first statement of Sri Aurobindo, that these forces have an attraction for both the human ego and for the Asura. So to understand this, we'll try to understand the levels of consciousness involved. So between the unregenerate animal soul and the vital energy of human beings, there are other non-evolutionary hostile forces which are working. So between the unregenerate animal soul, the animal soul which is an unregenerated affair, where you have got sex for procreation and nothing else, and then the vital energy of the human being, where other than procreation, other factors come in. Between the two, you see that between sex used only as a procreation and sex used also for other purposes other than procreation, between the two, some other factor has already been involved, so that there is a transition. So this transition from the animal, what you call the unregenerate animal soul, and the vital energy of the human being, which is something more than procreation in the arena of sex, there are certain other variables that are acting, and they are the non-evolutionary hostile forces which are at work. So these are the formations assumed by the life principle, which act upon earth life earth life to combat the powers of light. They are the formations assumed by the elements which are there in the vital consciousness. Why vital consciousness? Because domination of human evolution is easier for the hostile beings if they are stationed in the vital worlds. That is why from the vital worlds, all sorts of negative influences come. It is more important that the negative influences come from the vital worlds than the other non-evolutionary worlds. You see, there are non-evolutionary worlds everywhere. It's not only the vital, there's a mental, there's a physical, but the control of the people, the control of the human being is more easily achieved. The control over the evolution of the human being is more easily achieved if you are stationed in the vital world. That's why the forces of the vital world, they're very important. You have to understand these forces which are at work. These forces which are at work, and between the unregenerate animal soul, which was only involved in procreation, and the vital energy of the human being, which has gone beyond procreation to all sorts of perversions. So it's not only procreation, but also all sorts of perversions that have come in. And in between all these forces are acting, these hostile forces are acting. And these hostile forces are different types, and they are acting in different ways. Now, people, for you who are not comfortable with the term non-evolutionary world, I think we have previous slides in the previous programs in the new perspectives where we have talked that the manifestation where we are seeing only the evolutionary world, but there behind the evolutionary manifestation there are non-evolutionary worlds also, and these two worlds are interacting with each other. This is a different subject. If you're not conversant with it, I would request you to go back to one of our presentations in the new perspectives and see the equation between the evolutionary and the non-evolutionary worlds. So there is a world of evolution, and behind it there are non-evolutionary worlds, worlds which are not evolving but which are interacting with our evolutionary worlds. So behind the mind there's a non-evolutionary mental world. Behind our vital, which is evolving, there is a non-evolving vital world, and behind our physical there is a non-evolving physical world. Now there are these formations in this vital world. They are coming and they are interfering with us, and there are different kinds of principles there, different formations there, but we will try to understand three main formations. One is the lower vital principle, which is the Pishacha, which is known in our Indian tradition as the Pishacha. All are the different grades of the devil. Then above the lower vital principle of the Pishacha is the violent kinetic ego, of the Rakshasa, the middle vital principle. That's different. That's a bit different from the Pishacha. Pishacha is lower vital principle, and then the Rakshasa brings a violent kinesis. And then above it is an intellectual but unregenerated ego of the Asura, the mentalized vital principle. The vital principle which already has incorporated a little bit of the mind, a little bit of intellectuality. Then it can be so dangerous. You see, if the vital principle incorporates a little bit of intellectuality, then that intellectuality is going to serve the vital demands, no? That it is going to plan or devise newer type of vital, what you call excursions, which would be so disruptive to humanity. So that is very difficult. So you see, these are things that are coming up in the vital, and you see from below up. So there's first the Pishacha. Above that in power is the Rakshasa, and still above that is the unregenerated ego of the Asura. So these influences of the vital worlds are hostile forces in our life. They either possess humans or act to them. So these influences of the hostile forces, they either possess the human beings, and that means they captivate the human beings, or they act through them. So it can be two ways. They can act through the human beings, or they can totally overwhelm the human being, as if the human being is an automation in their hands. Now, then these three are acting differently. These three forces are acting differently, which we'll try to understand. Very interesting. The lower vital Pishacha forces act on the physical vital plane of consciousness. Now, what is the physical vital plane of consciousness? The physical vital is the plane where the vital energy has to be subservient to the physical demands. So the vital energy is not so much involved in his passions, in his dynamisms, in his great likings and dislikings. Not that. It has to follow the physical demands of nature. So that's the beginning. That's the lowest level. So the vital force, that the vital consciousness or the vital or the vital, which we call the vital energy, that has to follow the dictates of the physical demands. Here the vital is not involved in that, what we see in love. No? In love we see romance, passion, and all that things that go on with all that, what do you call that, tremendous love and affection and all that goes on. Not only that, it's not only love and that passion and that great energy in making love, all that, but all the opposite things are also there. That can be jealousy, there can be different things also. But here in the physical vital is only involved in the satisfaction of the just physical demands. The vital is not indulging in his own vital excesses. It is just trying to satisfy the physical demands. And this is how you see phenomena like rapes and sadomasochism, which is very, very interesting and important things, because you have to understand them, how they are occurring, where the mechanical component takes precedent over passions. Now, this is a very important area. There is a mechanical component is taking precedent over passions. For example, if you say rape, in rape, how much sex is involved? Means if you say sex, which means the things that go on with sex and love and all that, is nothing. There's no orgasm involved. You are just emptying yourself into somebody else. It's more of a wound. It's more of a wound than sex. Rape is more of a wound than sex. And then sadomasochism is another very interesting area where we are trying to see how the non-erotogenic zones of the body, how they can be involved, whether they are involved in torture or enjoying torture or giving torture. You see, it's not necessary that you are involving the sexual organs. You are involving the non-erotogenic zones of the body. You are bringing them up. Now, this is interesting because there is a recent trend of non-sexual eroticism. This is now being discussed in many places. I think Foucault gave a lot of importance to it, that this is something which is happening, which is a new thing about the body. The human body is trying to be also important as the vital energy. You see, we first started with the physical consciousness, which is represented in our body. And then the physical consciousness was then enlivened with energy. The energy, vital energy, impregnated the physical consciousness to produce a different type of human being. So which is not only physical, but is physical plus full of energy, full of vitality, full of emotions. So now the body is trying to assert its own uniqueness, and it is not trying to depend only on the sexual excitement. It is trying to be excited in its own way. So somewhere sadomasochism behind is what we call giving an inkling that something like that is going to happen. And this is very important, because afterwards when we'll talk of transformation, we'll see that this is the plane of consciousness which has to be addressed first. This is the plane of consciousness which has to be addressed first. We'll come to it, because when you are trying to have a new type of body, when, as Mother said, that in the new creation, what will happen, the usual process of sexual procreation will not be there. So, and we see that beginning is already being made. Sri Aurobindo had said that there will be a new way in which children will be born, not in the usual way, and he had also said that before that, science will also come to help that. Science will also precede that initiative by its own methods, and that we see that we're happening. Sri Aurobindo said that in 1950, 49, 50, and after that we see what are the things that are happening that has led to the IVF babies, and even that when Dolly was cloned, the sheep was cloned from the somatic cells, not from the sex cells. So you see this what we are seeing at a very perverted level, very lower level, very deviated level at the physical vital. This is a thing which, when transformed, if this plane is transformed, can give rise to many unique things at a different level, at a different denouement. So though it is a very troublesome thing, physical vital, and it's something that we despise, something we are not comfortable with, but you have to remember that we can't throw it out, because afterwards in transformation, this plane has to be given its due importance. Only then things will change. After that, we have this middle vital. The middle vital is the middle vital of the Rakshasa force, acts on the vital physical plane of consciousness. where the physical is to succumb to violent passions of the life energy, that's an ordinary love. This is what we are conversant with the middle vital Rakshasa force acting on the vital physical plane of consciousness. The physical has to succumb to the violent passions of the life energy. So love is something where you have to consider the passions, the energies, the different forms of romanticism. All these things have to be considered. When it's not, love doesn't mean only at the physical level you are acting, or sex doesn't mean that the sex has to be converted into something else, where you have all these dynamisms and passions and romanticism. If that was not there, then we would not have this so much literature. Not throughout the world, literatures and cinemas and everything is surviving only because of this vital physical love. And this first started long back. Even Sri Aurobindo also acknowledged it. If you see, the Sri Aurobindo is saying that there are 4 great events in history. Of which the first was the Hellenization of Troy. He talks about the Hellenic civilization, and there are many things of the Hellenic civilization, of course, the art, the philosophy, and all. But together, you have to remember the Romans also was one part of Hellenic civilization, so, and which was given a very high place. So that is very important. Then, of course, shifts when he says the 4 great events in history. All the 4 great events in history are associated with love. So the first one, where you can bring in romantic love with other things of the Hellenic culture. Second thing, he said that crucifixion of Christ humanized Europe, but actually it was also universal love that was being propagated. And the third thing he told about Vrindavanization of Krishna, where it was devotional love, something else. And the fourth he had said about Kalakai of Kurukshetra, where love is brought to be synthesized with knowledge and with karma. So you see, everywhere love is an important component in the 4 great events of history which Sri Aurobindo had dictated. Now the next one, the mentalized vital Asuric force. It acts, the mentalized vital or the Asuric force, it acts on the mind. It is very important. Now, this is where it is the mentalized vital, where the vital has been impregnated by intellectuality. So the vital can become a real thinking, acting, creating demon. You see, the devil can be hot-headed, blunt, but the devil is no more hot-headed and blunt when it comes to the level of the Asura. At the level of the Rakshasa, it can be a little blunt. At the level of the Pishacha, it is totally blunt. But at the level of the Asura, the devil has become intelligent. Devil has become intellectual. And it is here that sex, power, and money, together with drugs, a new 4th component, together with drugs, they have linked together. And this is where actually all the things have been linked together. This interplay of power, sex, and money are linked together at the mentalized vital plane, at the plane of the Asura. At the plane of the Asura, they have become linked together. And we can see that. You see that Hugh Hefner of Playboy, he alone changed how the public discourse. He's a perfect example of how that force was acting through him. And today, the result of that, result of this mentalized vital Asuric force, what is the result? We see the multi-billion industry of the post-war world, the pornography, which is a multi-billion industry, and more important, increasing separation of eroticism from procreation. Of course, it is aided by things like birth control, technological and social developments with IVF babies and all that. But there is an increasing separation of eroticism from procreation. That is very important. That is a contribution of that mentalized vital Asuric force. And that is there. It is actually contributing to the interplay of sex with power and money. And then we see this commoditization of pleasure, the commercialization of courtship, and all these things. Now, what are these hostile forces? They are there to oppose the powers of light, and they express some cosmic stress. They express some cosmic stress, Sri Aurobindo said. And Sri Aurobindo said that if you destroy them in the earth, they would still remain in the tribal worlds. So that's why, for example, Sri Aurobindo didn't waste his time to design how they could be destroyed in the earth. He, on the other hand, spent his time to see that how they could be transformed. You see, there is a basic thing, very important to understand, that if these forces are destroyed, they will go to the non-tribal worlds, then they will remain. So for Sri Aurobindo said that, in Sri Aurobindo's view, fighting with them here so that they are destroyed will have little value unless they are transformed. And then this these forces have self-fulfilled egos in the tribal worlds. So in the tribal worlds, they are full of ego and that ego is fulfilled. But human ego is not fulfilled. Human ego always has an yearning, always has a gap, always has something more to achieve. So until the soul replaces the human ego, the human soul has to replace the human ego at one point in time. Until that is done, the human ego is imperfect. It is not self-fulfilled, and therefore the hostile forces find an easier way, or it is easier for them to gain control over those of the human ego. And that is how the hostile forces have induced perversity in earth ignorance. Now, how do you combat these hostile influences? One is development of ethics and morality. We always, throughout the world, all religions have tried to do that, especially in relation to things like sex and power. But at a certain point, morality backfires, and absolutist positions, you can't stick on them for a long time. Liberal positions also, you can't stick for them, because with legislations you cannot enforce or you have something permanent. And you have the other position where a sexual repression is essential to social oppression. You can take that kind of attitude, but that doesn't lead you to a very, what you call, place where you can actually conquer this interplay. And then the other great thing that was remaining was the family. We thought that the family would offer some support so that perversions should not occur, but that is not also occurring. So that is not also occurring. We'll come to it. So ethics itself undergoes a transvaluation from the infra-ethical, ethical to a super-ethical stage. Now, this is Sri Aurobindo's contribution. If you try to understand all these kinds of problems, the problems which have been raised up by sex, power, and money, then you have to understand that everything cannot be explained through what we call ethics or approach to ethics, because ethics also is a transitory stage. This is Sri Aurobindo's great contribution to the world of thought, that there is a transvaluation of ethics that is continuously going on. We have to reach a super-ethical phase, which is not where we will do whatever we like, not like that. It is a spiritual anarchism where you are intuitive and spontaneously free without disharmony. You will be doing the correct thing without any disharmony, without any perversion. But on the other hand, you are completely free. It is a type of spiritual anarchism. It is a very great goal. It can only come when there is a transformation of the human being into a higher being. It cannot come so easily. But then so easily also, problems will not be solved. And until the masculine and feminine principles relate to each other in equal poises at a very high level of consciousness, nature will undergo all sorts of experimentations, which we label as deviations. You see, the masculinity and femininity, they have to relate with each other at a very, very high level of consciousness. They have to come together. It has not been achieved till now. Until that is achieved, nature will try all sorts of deviations. Until these deviations are possible or will go on, there is a scope of this interplay of power, sex, and money going on with a pernicious influence. They will always go on. So this is also another thing that we have to consider, that masculinity and femininity as principles, they have to come and align with each other in equal footing. And the family has failed to grow as the first unit of collective consciousness. So nature is therefore breaking the family, the conventional family, to create a new type of family based on soul comradeship. So this is another thing that is happening now, that nature, because we thought that the family would be able to counter all certain kind of sexual devices, certain kind of interplays where perversions, extramarital relationships and all are so many, what you call, are encouraged. The family will be acting as a defense, but the family has failed to grow, and therefore the family is breaking. And the mother said that the new type of family will be formed, which is a family based on soul kinship. So until that comes also, we will not have full control of everything. And then this is very interesting. The death came with sexual reproduction. With asexual reproduction, there was no death. The amoeba doesn't die. It only replicates infinitely, and infinitely. So, but with sexual reproduction, death came. Now, it is my feeling that the ancient seers perhaps knew this intuitively, and therefore they wanted to transcend sex to experience the consciousness of immortality. You see that the ancient seers, when they wanted to transcend sex, it is not because of moral issues, because they have that intuition that only over sex you can have the consciousness of immortality, you can experience that consciousness of immortality because this death came with sexual reproduction. Perhaps because of this, and for some other occult reasons, the mother also said, the reference is there in the On Education, on that collected work, Centenary Education, volume 12, where she said that each act of sex takes one a step towards death. Each act of sex takes one a step towards death. I think that perhaps because of this intuition and for other occult reasons also, that mother had given this statement. And this very important statement of mother, that if desire of sex is not dissolved at the time of death, it produces little vital entities which go on plaguing sensitive people with strong sexual instinct so as to feed on their vital force emanated at the time of sexual act. Is that the writer which mother was referring, who had written about the vital forces, small vital forces he was seeing always surrounding people with strong sexual urges, is something. When mother was talking about it, she had told that if the desire of sex has to be dissolved at the time of death, if it is not dissolved, then it will produce these vital entities, little vital entities, and they will go and select people who are instinctively or who have got sexually, who are more active, and they will surround them, and they will always feed on their sexual act, and will always go on stimulating them to all sorts of perversities. So that is very important thing. Now, this interdependence of power, money, and sex, that mother's vision of the serpent, you know, that is an occult vision, who kept watch on the terrestrial wealth. Those who have, I will not go into details on this, only to say that mother's occult vision, where she saw the serpent who was guarding the wealth of the universe, the terrestrial wealth, and the key of getting to that source of wealth was a mastery over the sexual impulse. And because every power, the very need of power has in its end a sexual satisfaction. You see that this is very interesting. You can have power of all sorts, but at the end, all kinds of power, at the end they boil down or they end up into some sort of sexual satisfaction. So this conquest over sex also gives you an edge over the conquest over power and the conquest over the desire for money. And now the question is, you can say that power we see that people employ in social situations. For example, a politician uses power, or a big capitalist uses power for other things other than sex. Why are you bringing sex into it? So power can be something which is an interplay of forces, which is being used by politicians, which is being used by capitalists. They can use in different ways. But then, as Foucault showed, that power equations can get transferred from the social matrix to the body matrix, which is very interesting, because the body is the ultimate battleground. The body is the ultimate battleground. Somehow I think we should afterwards we concentrate on the body, then we'll understand, because today we'll get out of focus, we start talking on the body. But this is important because the power equations can actually get transferred. You can see that their politician is using power for some different reason, and the capitalist is using power for some entirely different reason. But at the end, that can be a transfer. That can be a transfer of power from the social to the body. It is actually possible. It actually happens. Now, power equations are used in lower nature when one is not doing what one wants. So whenever you are employing a power equation, there will be a resistance, and resistance itself is very unique. You see, politically resistance was said to no, but resistance can also be creative. Resistance can also be creative and can force power relations to change their strategies. This is how homosexuality was considered to be a disease. But that resistance that happened, the homosexual groups gathered, and the enormous resistance they created, the power groups which were deciding what will be an illness and what will not be an illness, they had to change their strategies. So you see, the resistance also is important, but resistance doesn't not only come at our level. Resistance comes from something deeper also. What is that? Resistance comes from something deeper level. That all power in our outer being is, if we speak from the metaphysical psychological perspective, metaphysical psychology, that all power in our outer being is derived from the vital, and the inner being has an inner power called pranic shakti, which is connected with the universal energy, with the universal prana. And behind the inner being is a soul space, where the soul entity is there, having the soul power, the power of the soul. Now, influences from these inner powers, they can also come into our life, outer life, as unique resistances. and aided by intuition, they stimulate us for transcending the power equations of the outer being. So resistances are not only at our level, they come from some deeper level, from the soul, from the inner, from our inner energies. Resistances can come, and together with intuition, which comes from above, they can also stimulate us to think that, oh, this is something which you have to transcend, which you have to consider, where we cannot remain for long. So this is an interesting thing. Now, power at the outer being is not backed by appropriate knowledge. What is happening in the outer being, the power is not backed by knowledge. An approximation only occurs to the inner being. The perfect synthesis of knowledge and power occurs in the supermind. We are not going to that. The supramental power can actually transform the lower desires because it is immune to the negative influences that arises from the inconscious. All the negative things in us arise from the inconscious. Only the supramental creative consciousness can counter them. Short of that, they cannot be counted fully. So the supramental power itself can change things and can eventually produce a sexless being. So we will not go into that. That is a different territory altogether. Will be debated from our main topic. But that is very interesting how a new creation will come, how a sexless being will come, and such a being will not be powerless. As Mother said, that it can have a calm and absolute power. She gave an example like Goddess Athena in Sri Aurobindo's Perseus the Deliverer. There's a description of Goddess Athena. And if you're acquainted with that, you can go and look at that, and you will see that picture fits in with what Mother said, the power and the beauty and the calm of the sexless being. Again, this is a different subject. We'll not go into that because it will take away our time. But this is something we have to remember. The world is now progressing to a point where we have to transcend our sexual identities into a new type of identity. Now, money, this is again a very, very interesting thing. Dr. Dalal very favorite pointed this out. It was one of his very favorite things to point out, and I fully agree with him. It is so beautiful. The Indian tradition has always said that there are 4 motivations of life: the dharma, which is the path of self-righteousness; artha, that is money power; kam, the power of the vital, the libido, from where sex arises; and moksha, the liberation from ego-mediated pleasures. So you see, from the beginning, dharma, artha, kam, sex was given an equally important role or position with the other things. But in Western psychology, has not given money that due. Has not given money that due. The artha has been given the same position as kam. But in Western psychology, Freud stressed on the libido, Adler stressed on the power, Watson stressed on behavior, Frankl stressed on the will to meaning. There are then the will to power of nature and other things. But not money. Nobody is talking about money as a motivating force of human behavior. They are talking about other things other than money. But in Indian psychology, in the Indian tradition, money was given a same, what you call, pedestal as the dharma and the kama and the moksha. Very interesting. But though paradoxically, in India, what happened, especially after the Shankaracharya's portrayal of reality, the detachment from money was given a higher pedestal. Though Indian philosophy always wanted the 4 motivators to be dharma, artha, kam, moksha, but in paradoxically, what was in life, always we give more higher pedestal to people who are detached from money. The problems with money, the conflict about money is, as the Mother said, is a conflict of ownership. It is a conflict of ownership. Money should not be a possession. Like a power, it is a means of action that is given to you. You see, we think we possess money. It is an impersonal, in an impersonal and enlightened way, you must know how to use money, because all wealth belongs to the divine, and those who hold it are trustees, not possessors. It is with them today. Tomorrow it may be elsewhere. This is never taught in our schools. I think at the very beginning, in our schools, children should be taught that we do not possess money. When someone comes to me, a drug addict, and tells that is with my money, I'm smoking cannabis. Why should you castigate me? I said, what is your money? Your father works in the government and he gets his salary from all our taxes. I also have an equal right to ask you why my tax money is being misused. So that thing is there. People think that it's my money, but money doesn't belong to anyone in particular. It's a power that has been distributed, and we have to have the correct attitude towards money, and that has to be shown from our very childhood. So attitude towards money, neither a materialistic possessiveness nor an aesthetic withdrawal. You see, what Sri Aurobindo advocates that you don't have to be materially possessive about money. You don't have to be ascetically withdrawn from money. Our thing is that we have to bring back money from the clutches of falsehood and to be placed at the service of truth, because money today, wealth today, is in the hand of the Asuras, and it has been conquered from the Asuras, because the Asuras are intellectual vital beings. The devil who has become intelligent and intellectual, tremendous, and from him the money has to be brought back. And for that, what you need is an equality of mind, absence of demand, and full dedication of what you possess and receive, and all your power of acquisition to the divine Shakti that has to be given. But again, remember, in Sri Aurobindo's perspective, the true value of wealth has still a greater purpose: to make the earth ready for the new creation. So that is what we have to creatively find out, how we can use money to make the earth ready for the new creation. That is a challenge that has been given to us, and this challenge we have to accept, and we have to grow in it. So like yoga has grown with many things, so this also we have to grow. You can't leave it only to the economists to plan what money will be done with what. The equitable distribution of money for the peoples of the world, that is one thing, but using money for the new creation is something else, which we have to intelligently design. Now this is a very interesting recent research which I am quoting, and which was published in the European Journal of Personality in 2013, where they were trying to examine sex, power and money, and predicting the influence or interplay from the dark triad and the dimension of honesty and humility. You see, the dark triad, this Machiavellianism, this cunningness and duplicity, psychopathy and narcissism, they were highly correlated with the interplay of sex, power and money. So all these things, cunningness, duplicity, psychopathy. Now, psychopaths are people who have no sense of guilt and who do not learn from mistakes. They have no sense of guilt and they never learn from mistakes. And narcissism. So narcissism is self-love, and they were highly, linked with this misuse of sex, power and money. Sex meaning short-term mating tendencies and sexual favors, which are given in many places. Power, which is social dominance and desire for power, and money in meant by conspicuous consumption and materialism. So all these things were correlated with low honesty, humility. Honesty and humility correlated very low with these things, and they so the end result is that the sex, power and money, they still remain the most disturbing things at the practical level of life. So it is very interesting that modern day researchers are also coming to examine the same things in different types of ways. I think more this kind of research will come, and which will actually show us in the professional world that how we have to deal with these things and not to turn a blind eye to these very important factors. So conquest over power, sex and money is needed not only for new integer of morality, just for a new, you see, we use the term new normal in the after COVID-19. So there is a new morality, no? So don't hate the rapist, hate the rape, don't hate the rapist. Like that, the new morality might come. But we are not concerned with that. We are concerned of the conquest over power, sex and money, so that it is a foundation for the new creation that has to be made. And is that possible? Of course, as Sri Aurobindo says in the Meditations of Mandavya, in his poem, I know, O God, the day shall dawn at last, when man shall arise playing with the mud and taking in his hands the sun and stars, remold appearance, law and process old, man once more seem the image true of God. I think we have 10 minutes, and we'll leave the 10 minutes is not much, but you can, if you want to ask anything, or more important, if you have to add anything, or if you want to qualify what we have said with something else, you are free to do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sumitra, very much for this wonderful and deep presentation.
Actually, that's what I wanted, because for time constraint, I couldn't tell. This separation from eroticism and procreation. You see, that is a very important thing which we have to consider now. Because if you say that with the, you can tell me that appearance of IVF and test tube babies And when mother said that new process of procreation will come, children will be born without the usual process of procreation, then we'll say, will that coincide with a heightened eroticism? But it's not going to be that. That what mother said, that there will be cultivation of the capacity of having a baby without the usual process of procreation, we actually need a transformation of the present human capacities into something else, the intermediary beings, before the supramental being comes. So it is not like that. That means it is a free liberty is being given to eroticism to prosper, because without procreation we are having a baby. So now let us come and play with eroticism more and more. It's not going to be that. It's not going to be that easy. What is going to happen is, what mother envisages, the new creation, will only come with the transformation of consciousness. And that transformation of consciousness means a victory over power, sex, and money. Only then we can reach at that position where the human being can venture into something where, without the usual process of procreation, something else can also happen. So this is something this also has to be made clear.
Maybe Dr. Basu, you could just come out of the screen share so that we can go back to regular view. If you could come out of screen share.
Yes.
Right. Yes, thank you for this. There are several questions here waiting for you. I will read them out for you very quickly. Mankind has used two powerful weapons to destroy its own powers and enjoyment: wrong indulgence and wrong abstinence. Sri Aurobindo, please give an elaboration as it is connected to your subject. Don't know. Can you comment on this? It's not very clear.
It was a big thing.
Yeah, that mankind used two weapons to destroy its own powers and enjoyment: wrong indulgence and wrong abstinence. So can you elaborate on this from Sri Aurobindo's point of view? What is this wrong indulgence and wrong abstinence? Yeah, I think the whole presentation was about this, those interfering forces.
So the because to understand this perspective what we have presented, we have to understand the interplay of both our forces, human forces, and also the forces of the non-evolutionary worlds, the Asuric, Rakshasa, and these forces. Only then we'll be able to understand this question that has been raised. If you have to see from Sri Aurobindo's perspective, you have to see both the paradigms together, with the non-evolutionary paradigm and the evolutionary paradigm, because they are constantly interacting with each other. One is not isolated. If I have become a great, what you call, pervert who is wanting to destroy many things, I am also aided by these non-evolutionary powers. So by itself, by destroying me, nothing happens. That's why we, if you see in human life, that people who are perverted, people who have problems, people who are destructive, when we have legal sanctions against them, or we might jail them, or we might punish them, nothing happens. Things go on, People don't learn from mistakes. People never learn from mistakes. We think that we make very strong laws and there will be no rapes, but there are more rapes before. We make very strong laws and all these things will not happen, because these forces of the non-evolutionary worlds, they are coming and they are interfering. So you see, they have caught hold of a person and they are trying to use that person. If that person gets free from that force will go and catch hold another person. The same reason why Sri Aurobindo didn't like capital punishment, because he said that the person who has murdered, who has been possessed by a vital force, and when the vital force has completed its task, it leaves the person and goes and catches some other person. By that time, the other person has become free. So it is a very complex play of forces. We have to understand this complex play of non-evolutionary and evolutionary forces to understand this whole thing, and why in humanity we are being unable to do all things with our strong legislations and strong political will. We just don't stand the test of time.
Mm-hmm. There was also just you reminded me with your example in the ashram when somebody complained to the mother about someone who is behaving not properly, that he has to be banished from the ashram, and then he was stealing something, yeah, and then she said, do you want this force to come to you? Then next, you will be next to receive that influence. So we have to really, yes, address the force rather than the person.
Somebody else asked a question that what happens to people who do not have much money and all that. You see, at every level, these forces act. It doesn't depend on whether you have much money or less money, or it doesn't depend on that, whether you are very rich or whether you are very poor. These forces can act at any level of consciousness, whether at any level of social consciousness they can act. So it doesn't what you call act specially on people who we think are very powerful in position, in social position and all that. Not like that. Very, very ordinary people, they might be sucked into this force. If they don't have money, they will try to have money by clandestine means, or whatever money they have, they will destroy that money. That we see. As a doctor, as seeing patients, I see that how very poor people who should save the little bit of money they have will spoil that money in drinks and other all kind of things, which he should not do because they cannot afford to do, but they are going to do it, and they actually do it. And that's why suffering continues.
There is one more question. What is the relation between the triple labor, aspiration, rejection, and surrender, specifically the rejection components for mind, vital, and physical, to the conquest of power, wealth, and sex?
That is sadhana, but this question is related to our personal sadhana. So it is something which it is our, what you call, it is our main thing which you have to clutch if you have to get over this. Rejection is very difficult because constantly we have to reject. But this rejection, especially if you want to get over a certain impulse, for example, sexual impulse, this forcible rejection like that, it is not always successful because it can get suppressed and can come up later in different ways. So you have to go on persisting together with that aspiration. You see, only rejection without that aspiration to rise to a higher consciousness, without surrendering to the Shakti, will lead you to problems, will lead you to this type of Freudian repression and all. You see, there's only they're trying to reject from consciousness. Where it will go? It will go into my unconscious. But the repression has to be, rejection has to be tuned in with aspiration and with surrender. Then only that risk will not be there, that will get repressed and will come up as a different problem. So it has to be continuously. If you do that, then one day the problem that you are wanting to master will, you will see that it is automatically, it is dropping bit by bit. Of course, it can come. Sometimes it can come, it can invade you in your dreams and your subconscious acts, but that takes time. That is not so easy. But you have to remember that rejection has to be coupled with equal intensity with the aspiration and the surrender to the Shakti. Actually, we can't surrender to the Shakti. We reject that, we try still because we have our moral injunctions. We try to forcibly put so much energy on rejection. But surrender to the Shakti is very difficult. Once you surrender, then you can't take it back. Then you can't have doubts. But because we are mental beings, we have doubts. And the main reason that our surrender doesn't become so effective is because we try to do it mentally, and we want to do it mentally, then the mental mind will come up with doubts and will spoil everything. So that the movement of surrender also you have to start initiating from in your depths, from the psychic being in your depths. You have to be in your consciousness there, and there you have to surrender to the Shakti. And then of course mind, of course you can also surrender. You have to concentrate it between your eyebrows, but in a general way, because we are intellectual beings, we will always be open to doubts, and that is why our rejection, all these things, they can't stand alone. So alone it will not stand unless it is tied up with the two, and then they have to be done in the proper way. I feel that Vladimir can tell something.
Yeah. This is actually, you already answered the next question, which is here also about suppression of the by mental control is not enough. Yes, it is not enough. The aspiration first, then rejection. The rejection has to be done on the level of aspiration. If aspiration is not there to really reach higher levels of consciousness or deeper, higher potential, then it won't work. So rejection will never work. It will just do something else. So there is also the question, where do Paishacha Rakshasas and Asura live?
They live in their planes of their own non-evolutionary planes, which are here. We are in that also. We are actually not in only in an evolutionary world. We are in a matrix where the evolutionary and non-evolutionary worlds are intermingling with each other. So they are not in any far off place. They are there, here. They are with us. They are in us. They are always trying to what you call force us to do something or the other. But the higher forces are also there. They are also there. You see that the non-evolutionary worlds, the higher forces have those things which we call as fairies, angels, and other things. And the lower forces are, we call them asuras, rakshasas, and all these things. Everything is there, and everything is around us, and everything is in us, inside us. We are in the same matrix where they are residing. Nothing is beyond this matrix. It is the same place. In the same place, all of us are existing together. So this is something when we are not aware of it. Not we are aware of it because the non-evolutionary worlds do not have matter as a starting point, because our senses are materialistic senses. So that's why we can't understand them. So then to understand them, you ought to perceive them, you have to go to your subtle senses. You have to use your subtle senses to understand them. With your gross material senses, you cannot understand them, because the material senses can only work in those places where matter is the starting point. In places where matter is not the starting point, our sensory organs, usual sensory organs, will not work. Then you have to understand, go inside and cultivate your subtle senses. Only then these things will work.
Thank you very much.
Till that time, it will come to us in different influences, as archetypes, in our dreams, in our symbols. So they will will make their presence felt in different ways.
Yeah, I may just add one small kind of thought which comes to me. But you see, when mother was totally free from these forces and dealt with them in transformative way, and even in the 70s already, in 71, she says in Agenda that you can't imagine what kind of forces are coming back to me, knocking into my doors. Forces of desires from the childhood, forces from youth. Those forces which were there once activated in my consciousness, they are coming back. So somewhere in this bigger world, they are still there, having their place or their life, as it were, and can come to us anytime. So to be free from that, one has to gain some higher level of consciousness from which you can view them as outer forces and deal with them as outer forces already. So you can have your own kind of gaining consciousness. So what happened, and that is the description in the Gita, where Sri Krishna says that all the rivers of desire fall into the ocean, and we are the ocean. And so these rivers cannot move us. We can see them, they will be there, but they will not motivate us, they will not possess us, and that is the freedom from them. So thank you very much for your beautiful exposition and explanation, the most needed one, because there is always a confusion in this field. And I hope we continue this dialogue. It's very needed for all of us to continue this exploration. It's a new psychology, totally on a new ground, on the integral yoga's ground. So with this, I would like to invite you for the next time to talk. You will have to speak still on the rebirth and karma at the end of November. So we are looking forward to meet with you again, Sumitra Basu. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Basu. Very much appreciate it. Thank you all for joining us, and everyone will be getting an email on the upcoming events. I don't want to take time now because I know Dr. Basu has another commitment, but thank you for joining us, and again, thank you, Dr. Basu. Namaste.
Namaste.